All right. Hey, Ben. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Your bio's pretty cool. It looks like you've done just about everything. Is there anything that you haven't done yet that you still want to do in this life?
I haven't seen New Zealand in person, so that's definitely on my list of things to still do. And there's probably a dozen other places on the planet I want to visit before I leave it.
It's funny you bring up New Zealand because just last week I had a really nice woman on who migrated there or immigrated there, and she had never been, and she did it at 60 years old, and she was telling me about it. It's one place I want to go as well, but
Yeah.
it's just so far away. It's like the farthest place on the planet almost, save for maybe the South Pole. Even New Zealand's not that far from the South Pole, uh,
Yeah. Not. I mean, in comparison, no.
not compared to the U.S. Right? Exactly. So, all right. Well, let's just cover a couple of the points, things that you've done or doing, and then I know you got a book. Your book is called Having Expectations. Is that correct?
It's what to expect when having
Oh,
expectations.
what to expect when having expectations. Okay. But I wanted just to cover, okay, author, yeah, speaker. Tell me about speaker. What do you speak about?
So it's a lot to do with improv and with expectations. So it depends on the audience and we're trying to accomplish in the speaking engagement. But I speak about the use of improv and how it works in our everyday lives, and then inevitably that starts to open the discussion about expectations and how expectations affect our everyday lives and what goes on there. So they're very tied in together, and so it largely depends on who the audience is and what they're looking for.
So when you say improv, you're talking about improvisational comedy or not necessarily funny?
It doesn't have to be funny. It is definitely the improv that people have seen from the show, like Whose Line Is It Anyway, or uh, when people are talking about movies and where scenes were improvised by the actors and they just were more flowing, more natural. So a lot of the Marvel movies that we all love, a lot of the scenes in the Marvel movies have been improvised over time. Either somebody forgot their lines or they just tried something else and everybody kind of went with it. So that's the type of improv that I'm talking about. Because a lot of people think the word improv means stand up comedy, which is not the same thing. But the fact that we improvise every moment of every day of our lives means if you learn the rules of improv, then your life is just that much easier. So
Yeah, I was going to say that. I mean, when you run into somebody at a supermarket, your conversation is improv because you don't know what they're going to say. You may have an agenda. You may have gone in there to buy a particular item, and if you had to ask for it, but you don't know where the conversation is going to take you, and you just have to sort of respond to what the other person gives you.
exactly, and that's where we live our lives. We live a life of improv, and I didn't know there were rules to improv until I took an improv class, and it just made it so easy. And so the same rules apply to life, and it makes it easy and so much more fun and entertaining in a way.
Well, give me an example how you would apply that. You said rules of life. Make the connection for me.
Sure. If you ask anybody who's ever heard that there are rules to improv, they probably remember one. And that rule is yes and. Or they'll say something like yes something, and it's like they understand that it's there. But that particular rule is yes and. Yes and really applies to the human nature of accepting what is and then doing something about it. So anytime somebody's having a hard time in life or they want to overcome an addiction or they're having financial problems or they're having relationship problems, before they can do anything about any of those issues in life, they have to first accept that there is a problem, that there's an issue they want to resolve. So that's the yes and the yes and. If somebody comes up to you in a grocery store and starts a conversation, that is what is. They're starting a conversation with you. The and portion is what are you going to do with that situation? And So if it's, my finances aren't where I want them, and I can go get another job, or I can increase my hours, or I can innovate something and become an overnight success somehow. Uh, there's so many different ways to respond to that moment in time where you're like, I don't have the money I want. Walk into the store and you're having a conversation with somebody, or they come up to start a conversation with you. As long as you accept that's what's happening, they're coming up and talking to you, you can respond accordingly. So it's very simple, and most of the time we don't think twice about these things. But that's kind of the biggest rule of improv, and that's just how we handle with life, because so many people, and there's plenty of YouTubes to show this as reality, so many people aren't accepting what is, and instead of yes and, they're no but. And that really comes down to, I'm not accepting that we're in a pandemic and we have to wear a mask, so I'm going to throw a hissy fit. It's kind of the opposite of accepting what is and dealing with it. I've seen some YouTube videos where the length of the argument lasted longer than it would have taken them to go shopping. Like, had they just put on a mask, walked in, they would be walking out on themselves still having a hissy fit. And I'm just like, why? You're wasting your time and everyone's around you. You're not creating any sort of peace within yourself and those around you. And it was kind of painful to watch that video. But that's an example of somebody not accepting what is and not adding value to the situation. So that's one rule of improv and how it applies to life.
Okay, I get that. In fact, I studied acting years ago, and it sounds very similar to one of the concepts that was given to me there. And they just worded it different. They said, listen, react, then act. And that's how you would work in any scene. You listen to what the other actor is saying, you react to what they say, and then you act. So yes and, basically.
Yeah.
Or no but, if that's the script. Because if you're working on a script, you have the option. My only concern about this whole concept is the idea of the reality of the yes and. And I think I'll take this to politics, not specifically to one party or the other, because quite frankly, I despise them both at this point. But
I hear you.
How do you know, like you mentioned the masks and the pandemic, in order to say yes and, you have to agree that the reality is what it is. And if somebody is giving you a reality that you don't accept, then I think saying yes and is probably not going to be something you're going to do.
Well, and the point of it is that and I'm not saying to surrender to the situation. Like, there should always be questions, and that's okay. It's not saying this is what is and I surrender to it and I'm a victim of the circumstance. On the flip side of like that particular video that I was talking about, the people in the store that are telling the person to put on a mask, what they can do is accept this person is going to cause problems. And either they can accept it or they can start fighting back. And that's the big difference is,
right.
When they don't accept it, then they start saying, well, you're wrong, but you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Welcome to politics. Everybody's wrong. Nobody's right. Nobody can do anything to convince anybody otherwise. And so nothing is getting accomplished. In stage improv, yes and is designed to move things forward. So nobody wants to go to an improv comedy show and watch people sit there and say, no, 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 and go nowhere. That's boring. It's lame. It's not entertaining. So the point is, like, if actors are coming out on stage and they're yes-anding each other, things are moving forward and everybody's enjoying the process. They're seeing things progress. They're growing, changing, and acting within the scene. And until, like in life, in those examples where everybody's no but, there's no progress. There's no motion forward. It's just this stagnant pool of everybody fighting each other. And so that's kind of what the whole process of the yes and is to progress things forward. And whether that's your own peace of mind, whether that's, maybe the store at that point would have said, you know what, it is not worth the aggravation of everyone around. We'll let this one person through the door, and the next person will have another argument or whatever it might be. They still could have progressed things forward. And in a way, in the video that I'm thinking of, they did, because they kind of told her to leave. So they progressed it in the sense of like, let's end this conversation. But there was like nothing was gained, if that makes sense. It was just this battle.
It makes perfect sense. And I think that people really need to pick and choose their battles too. Like you said, she could have just put on the damn mask, gone in, got her stuff, got out, and been, mumbling under her mask, driving home or something like that. But
instead she decided to cause herself stress and everybody around her stress.
And pulled everybody down. And pulled everybody down to her. Yeah, exactly. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to make sure we hit on your book, since that's why you're here. Does your book cover this, or what does your book talk about?
So the book, What to Expect When Having Expectations, really kind of speaks to why we have expectations, where they come from, and then ultimately how to deal with them when they come and smack us in the face. And what I mean by that is the only reason anybody gets upset is because an expectation hasn't been met. And so in those moments in life where we get upset, like the mask wearing lady who's yelling and screaming, we take those moments in time of being upset and work through the process of understanding our expectations, if they're reasonable, if we knew we had them, if we've bought into them with other people's expectations included, and ultimately negotiated a common ground, whether that's expectations with ourselves or people around us. So it explores all different kinds of areas around expectations. A lot of the big ones like politics and sex and religion and all of those sort of things. But it really dives into the more of the subconscious expectations and where they come from and why we have them. So
subconscious expectations of
how somebody grows up is really kind of how it affects them and how they see the world around them as an adult. So if you grow up in a loving, caring household, then you kind of expect the world to be loving and caring as you grow up. And then if you're somehow in a neighborhood where everybody's kind of selfish and hateful, then your world doesn't make sense to you subconsciously. And so it's in this fight of, but the world should be loving and caring, and it's not. And it just becomes this expectation that's going unmet, but you don't really know why, because now you're getting upset with everybody around you being angry and selfish. And the reason is because you grew up differently. And so your subconscious is kind of fighting the conscious thought that's happening around you. So that's kind of what's meant by the subconscious.
Can it be the other way around? Like people who have really bad, abusive parents?
Absolutely. Because how many times do we see people in relationships where they don't trust the other person because they saw an abusive relationship growing up? So how can somebody possibly care and love how can somebody possibly care and love me if I never saw that as a child? Like, it's not something that exists. So as an adult, I don't trust my partner to be a good, decent human being. So yeah, it works every which way possible. And then, that's where the conscious thought is an amazing thing, because we can change our subconscious thoughts by practicing a new conscious thought on a regular basis.
I think that's probably something that most people aren't at that point yet.
Yeah, it's called personal growth. It's an ongoing process, and you got to start somewhere.
I think a lot of people in this world run on autopilot.
That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah,
exactly.
We do have to wrap this up, Ben. Thanks so much for coming on. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yeah, the website is havingexpectations.com, and you can find some pretty cool stuff on there, as well as links to the book.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming on. I know we could have gone on with this. It's kind of a big topic here, but